this is James here with the Oracle Outlook for the week starting October the 28th, 2019. Thanks so much for tuning in and joining me for this week's video reading. Because Halloween falls on the calendar this week, I decided I wanted to work with one of my Halloween themed decks, which is a tarot deck. So the deck that's going to be assisting me for this week's reading is the Halloween Tarot. It is by Kipling West Karin Lee, and it is published by US Game Systems Incorporated. So now that I've set things up, let's get to the table and see what the Halloween Tarot has to say about the week ahead. And here we are with the cards on the table, and I'm going to take a few moments to shuffle the deck. And as I shuffle, I'm focusing on my usual intention for these weekly general readings. And that is for the information, for the insight, for the guidance and advice that is going to be most helpful and beneficial as we move through the experiences of the upcoming week. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and cut the deck. Put it back together. Now I'm going to fan the cards out. And I'm looking for 5 cards in the fan that are getting my attention. Alright, I have the 5 cards selected. I'm going to put the remainder of the deck to one side. Alright, I'm going to count back. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I'm going to do a variation of my line of 5, and the way I'm going to lay the cards out for this week is I'm going to start with the top card. It's going to go in the middle, and this is going to represent the central issue or focus for the week ahead. And then I'm going to simply lay the other cards around it. So cards 2 and 3 are going to be laid to the left of the center card, and then cards 4 and 5 are going to be laid to the right. Alright, so like I said, the middle card is going to represent the central theme, or the focus for the week ahead. And then the other cards are going to represent either influences or factors that play into the middle card, or they're going to be direct and specific experiences that are in accordance to the issue or theme. Alright, so having said that, let's take a look at the middle card. And here we have the moon. So I will say the first thing right off the bat is I think, if I remember correctly, there's going to be a new moon this week. So with that in mind, the moon card showing up, because I read the card as it can indicate lunar cycles or phases. And so for me, when it comes to timing, I tend to look at the new moon or the full moon with this, whatever is the next one that's coming up. So I believe that we are having a new moon, like I said, and with that in mind, then the new moon is all about setting intentions. So with this card, it's about what kind of intentions do we need to set in accordance to the new moon, right? It's a wonderful time to plant seeds or set intentions for things that we want to manifest. Right, so that is the first thing that's coming to me. Now, with the moon card in and of itself, one of its meanings for me is to be led and guided by our intuition. And so this could be a week where we are either doing one or two things. We are either discovering how our intuition speaks to us, because I'm a big believer that everybody's intuition speaks differently. So this may be a week where we are focusing on how our intuition speaks to us directly. You know, how is it unique and distinct to us, right? So there is that. The other thing, if it's not about discovering how your intuition speaks to you, then it's about honoring your intuition, right? Whatever intuitive prompts you may get, you're being asked to honor those, right? And the thing about our intuitive prompts is that if you're looking at the guidance from a very rational or analytical or intellectual standpoint, it won't make sense, right? So keep that in mind. The other thing here with the moon card, going with the idea about lunar phases and cycles and intuition, this could be a week for some where you're going to be experiencing bouts of high sensitivity. This is my card that would suggest like our sensitivity is being heightened to some degree. So you may want to pay attention to that. You know, it could be like mood swings, being overly emotional, you know, overly sensitive. So pay attention to that if it comes up for you this week. Another thing I talked about, paying attention to one's intuition, right? For some people, there may be a need or a prompt or a leading to work on your psychic sensitivity. Besides intuition, this is one of the psychic cards for me in the deck, so there may be some focus on psychic development. You know, I'm part of a psychic development group that meets once a month, and so this card is making me think of that. And with that in mind, there may be along the psychic development somebody who may be wanting to work on his or her mediumship. That's another aspect of this card for me, is about being a psychic medium. So this could mean that you find a group of like-minded people to sit in circle with, because the best way to develop your medium mystic skill or ability is to be in circle, which means that you sit in a circle, a development circle, with someone who is a highly trained psychic medium, and he or she is the facilitator, but the circle is designed to help everyone get more in touch with their intuition, and again, like I said before, their intuitive style, but also to help you grow and develop in those abilities. Another thing with this card is about paying attention to your dreams. So if you are a dreamer, this could be a week where one or two things are happening. Either you are becoming more aware of your dreams, meaning like you're being able to recall them more, or that if you already regularly do that, then your dreams may be quite vivid. So there is that. Oh, one other thing I will say, going along with the heightened sensitivity or being highly sensitive, this is a week to pay attention to how situations, circumstances, conditions, and even people may be emotionally triggering. So this could be a week where the moon card is giving you notice that you can get your buttons pushed. So pay attention to what are the situations, circumstances that are pushing your buttons. And understanding it may be just helping you become aware of your particular emotional reactions and responses to those triggers, right? The triggers are really an opportunity for you to take a look at your emotional reactions and responses, right? And the one last thing I will say with the moon is the moon could be suggesting that we're moving through a period of uncertainty. One of the meanings of this card for me is confusion, uncertainty, and bewilderment. So for some people, it may be that you are moving through a time of uncertainty, right? But it could be fleeting because the moon represents the night, and so it could just be a matter of a period of time, right, before the sun comes up. And the sun in this particular context would represent illumination or enlightenment. Right, but the moon is all about the subconscious and unconscious. And every time I think I'm done, I want to say something else. So with that in mind, there may be an opportunity or opportunities to work through some kind of either subconscious or unconscious fear Because sometimes for me, the moon card can come up at a time where we're being encouraged to face our fears. So sometimes in that context, this card for me can represent a childhood, fear or phobia. And like the one that's coming to me, just for me, when I was a child, I used to be afraid of the dark, right? And here we have a card that represents night and the dark, right? And with the Halloween theme, it's very easy for me to pick up on that. So it could be, for some people, it's a matter of, confronting your fear of being in the dark, right? And that could be both in the literal sense, like being in a room where there's no light or an absence of light, or that we're in a space where we are walking through a time of uncertainty or confusion or bewilderment, right? That metaphorical being in the dark. So again, that's the moon card. Summing up, it could be about being led and guided by your intuition, being aware of your sensitivity, being aware of your emotional triggers, confronting either childhood fears or unconscious fears. And with that, most people would say, well, if it's unconscious or subconscious, I may not be aware of it. You may have an opportunity that it brings it to the surface, right? And then, of course, working with our psychic or intuitive development. So that is the moon. So now let's see what the surrounding cards have more to say about the central issue. So the card on the far left, we have the King of Pumpkins. Right, so this is a person card. So when I'm working with tarot and a person card comes up, I tend to read it as a general type of approach. So here, with the King of Pumpkins, and I said Pentacles, the suit of pumpkins in this deck is the suit of Pentacles, if you're working with a more traditional deck, right? So Pentacles can be about material matters or material concerns. So generally speaking, when the King of Pumpkins comes up, it represents getting some power or control or a sense of mastery. That's all the meanings that I assign to the King aspect of the card, right? So power, control, mastery over what? Over our material matters and concerns, right? So getting a greater sense of our material world, right? Now, this could be a time where we are reflecting on what we value. Now, it's very interesting. I talked about with the moon card about the new moon, and the new moon represents setting intentions for manifestation. Well, he is the master of manifestation, right? If we go with the idea that the suit of pumpkins represents the material world, well, that's all about manifestation, right? So this could be a matter of, for some people, about how can you master your ability to manifest. First off, are you clear? Remember, the moon card was about confusion and uncertainty and bewilderment, right? Are you even clear on what it is that you want to manifest in this world or in your life? What do you want to bring to fruition this week? It could be, if you're not clear, maybe the first thing you would need to consider doing is becoming clear on what it is that you want to master or manifest in your life, right? And if we're going back to the idea about power, control, and mastery, if the moon card represents our subconscious or unconscious fears, and we're talking about confronting them, this card would suggest, getting that under control. Not having the fear overpower you, like you getting your personal power over the fear, right? Now, in another sense, this card can represent our finances. If we go with the idea that the pumpkins can represent money and finance, this could be getting more control or mastery over our finances. Right? If we go back to the center card, if there's been some confusion or uncertainty about our financial picture, so to speak, then this card, as the first card, is saying the first thing you need to do is kind of get that under control, right? And maybe how, for some people, the first thing is to maybe look at your situation if maybe you've been turning a blind eye to what's going on financially. This may be a week where the first thing you need to do to get power and control back is to actually look at what's going on in your finances and with your financial picture. Another thing for me with this card is that as a business person, I tend to look at this as an entrepreneur or a merchant. So with the moon card representing things like psychic development or being a psychic medium, then for somebody they may want to consider how they could grow or develop that into a business if they feel called to do that. So I'm seeing that with this card as well. The other thing with the moon card is that the moon card for me can represent entertainment and amusement. So it could be like somebody is doing something in the entertainment industry, being an entrepreneur in that regard. So they're either doing something with entertainment or something that's amusing or some kind of amusement. But it's in a business sense, right? So again, with the King of Pumpkins, this could be starting off saying, what do we need to do to kind of regain a sense of power or control over our material world? For some people specifically, that might have to do with finances. Again, pumpkins being money and finance. For some people, it might have to do with physical well-being. That just popped into my head. And then for some people still, it might have to do with career. So that is the King of Pumpkins. And so the interesting thing is when I lay the card down, taking some of the techniques I use with other systems, is that the king is now facing this card. So let's take a look to see what he's looking at here. And here we have the Nine of Ghosts. So ghosts in this deck corresponds to the suit of cups. So here we have the Nine of Cups or the Nine of Ghosts. This is very nice because this card, its chief meaning is that this is the wish card. So this is about wishes being fulfilled, wishes being granted, moving into a greater sense of emotional satisfaction and fulfillment. Right? So if I put the card down, here we have the king looking at getting a wish fulfilled or a wish granted, or focusing on emotional satisfaction or an emotional gain or reward, right? And how interesting is this? Now, if I pick the card back up, I spent time with the moon card talking about psychic development, right? Being a psychic medium. And here we have the central figure being surrounded by ghosts, right? Spirits. Behind the person could be, people who have passed, right? Playing on the idea that being behind the figure represents the past, right? So this is another nod possibly for some people who are feeling inclined to do more around being a psychic medium, right? And then I'm noticing too that we have another moon in the card. We have a crescent moon in the corner, right? So there's that nod again about, being led and guided by our intuition, right? And then I'm looking at the stars in the background, right? And if this is the wish card, that would make sense with the stars, thinking about when you wish upon a star, right? Now, the only other thing going with the idea about entertainment and amusement that I talked about with the moon, this card can talk about parties and celebrations. So if it's not an actual party, meaning like we're actually going to a party or a celebration, and that for some people with this being the week of Halloween, maybe even planning on going to a Halloween party, right? But if it's not an actual party or celebration, it may be, celebrating some kind of gain or attainment, right? Something being achieved and we're celebrating that. So if I put the card down, remember the king is looking at that. So remember, if this is about power and control and mastery over our physical world, then it could be about, being in alignment with what it is that we hope or wish to achieve or attain. right? If that's the intention, if the hope or the wish is the intention, then what are the actions that we need to take that are going to be in alignment with that intention and have our wishes and our dreams and our hopes come true, right? And again, for some people, this may be another nod about psychic development or being a psychic medium or mediumship. And then the other thing that I notice is that we have the Nine of Ghosts, and the Moon is also a 9 card because the 18 reduces to 9, so we have repeating nines. 9 as a theme in and of itself can represent wrapping things up. For me, it's the last single digit in numerology, so I tend to look at it as, wrapping things up. And then also with that is about looking at a cycle. Remember, the moon was about cycles and phases. Looking at a particular cycle and asking the question, what did I gain from that particular experience? Right? Because the 9 can represent lessons being learned, or it's known for me anyway, as wisdom gained through experience. And then sometimes I'm looking at the background of the King of Pumpkins and the Nine of Ghosts, the night background with the stars in the sky. Sometimes that could represent universal wisdom, wisdom on a higher level, or a different plane. If we go with the ghost, a different plane of awareness, right? Something that's more spiritual in nature with the spirits in the background, right? Could even be gaining some spiritual wisdom about a past or prior experience if I go back to the Nine of Ghosts with the ghosts behind the person, right? So that's how I would look at the first 3 cards. Now let's move over to the 4th card, and here we have another major arcana card. We have the World. So interesting. So there's something about, completing something or a cycle being completed, because the World for me can represent the successful completion of a cycle or a chapter or an experience, right? And how interesting is that this would turn up after I talked about the number 9 being about, wrapping something up, right? So it could just be a matter of what do we need to complete? What chapter in our lives needs to come to an end? And if we're going with spiritual or universal wisdom, that would fit with this card as well, because it usually represents a new level of awareness. And if something is being completed with the World card, it can also represent, a whole new world opening up as a result of that. Now, with the King of Pumpkins, I talked about one of the possibilities is that there may be some energy being put into one's career. So this card would make me feel like there could be the potential for a career change or shift. And 2 things come to mind. First is that somebody may be moving towards retirement, because for me this can represent retirement. Another thing with this card is that somebody may be exploring his or her career options. And with that in mind, there may be a sense of travel with that, or a move. The World card for me can represent a move that's there's some distance to it, right? It's long distance. So somebody could be changing states or even going international and changing countries. Now again, keeping with the theme and what I've talked about already, this is another card for me that would represent this idea about, psychic mediumship, right? Because if we consider the image, keeping with the theme, this could represent the spirit world itself. And we already had a clue with that, with the Moon card, but more importantly with the Nine of Ghosts. And the Nine of Ghosts mirrors this card. And it may be, as I'm aware of this, I just got this. Not only are we having Halloween, but if I remember correctly, November the 1st is All Saints Day, right? And there's this idea that around the time of Halloween and All Saints Day is that the veil between this world and the spirit world is thin. So there may be sensitives who are going to be picking up on that kind of energy this week. So there's that. The other thing that I wanted to say in relationship to career with this card is that this card can also represent a spiritual practitioner. So if we're not talking about being a sensitive or an intuitive or a psychic medium specifically, then there may be other spiritual practices that could be considered. Number one, of course, and it's only because I have it in my hand, but tarot. So this could be a card for me when we're talking about spiritual practices or spiritual practitioners. Tarot is one. Astrology is another. But usually for me it could be any and all types of spiritual practices. But again, this would be the sense of like we're not doing it for fun or doing it as a hobby or interest. This would be about moving into the career phase or stage with that particular practice. Right? And if you're already doing this, then the world could be, tapping into a larger or wider audience. Right? So if you're like local, then this would be about going beyond your local community. If you're already doing maybe work on a more national level, because I'm trying to think about like the United States, right? So it could be like you're a big deal in your local area, in your community. Then this would be about how can you widen that to maybe the state that you live in, right? And if you're already a big deal in your state, then how can you widen that so you become more known nationally, right? And if you're already pretty well known nationally, then this could be a nod that you're going to be thinking about ways that you could become international, right? And with that in mind, then the world could be a pun for the World Wide Web, right? The internet, right? But sometimes this card can be about going worldly, going global, going universal, right? And with that in mind, that new level of awareness that I talked about earlier, it would be maybe something of a worldly nature or something of a global nature or something that has more of a universal appeal, right? And as I'm laying the card down, what's coming to me, and again, this is coming back to the people who maybe are intuitives or sensitives, right? We may be tapping more, and I'm saying we in the collective sense, we may be tapping more into the collective and getting messages that are going to have more of a global or universal kind of theme or feel or appeal, right? With the world card, I'm seeing like the idea of going, like if you get messages that are more like 3D, based on the third dimension, that would make sense with the King of Pumpkins, right? It may be about moving to getting messages that are maybe more fourth dimension or fifth dimension. I'm thinking about the higher dimensions with the world card, right? So that's going pretty high up. If we bring this back down to earth, pumpkins, a little bit, then this could just be, again, about successfully completing something, coming full circle with an experience, or that there is a need for integration, wholeness and integration. And that would maybe be more on the physical or holistic level. All right, so now let's take a look at the final card rounding things out this week. And here we have Temperance. Oh, so the first thing that I want to say is that we have 3 cards from the major arcana. It's a big deal week, right? So there's going to be important issues or events that are getting our attention or that we're putting time and energy into this week. So now the first thing I will say about Temperance, if just going back to what I just said, I love how the cards follow up my last thought. So with the World card, I talked about this idea about wholeness and integration, and I said something on a physical level with physical well-being or something holistic. That would fit this card, right? First thing I noticed is that we have the woman who looks like a witch, but she's creating potions, right? So this could be, again, doing something maybe organic or something that has an organic or holistic kind of approach to it. I'm thinking about like, remedies, homemade remedies, potions, apothecary, homeopathic stuff, right? That's the first thing with temperance that I see, right? The other thing here is if we're embarking on something new, right? If the world card can represent a whole new world opening up, right? Because it's the card that's closest to temperance, then it could be embarking on something new in which we're going to be, experimenting with something. She looks like, in the more mundane sense, the idea about creating potions is about chemistry, experimentation. So this could be a week where, getting things going, we're starting to experiment with something new. And it could be that we're experimenting with something new so we can get a feel for it before we decide to commit to it fully, right? So it's about like testing the water, so to speak, getting your feet wet, so to speak. That's metaphorically. In another sense, temperance is about, moderation and balance. So for some people, it may be, how can you achieve a greater sense of balance? When I talked about the moon card about triggers, emotionally being emotionally sensitive or emotional sensitivity, then this card is about tempering that, right? So it's about not going to extremes. And if we go with the idea that like this is about testing the water, so there could be, you may find yourself being tested on that front, right? And so for some people, they may need to learn how to moderate their emotional reactions and responses, right? How can you temper those, right? How can you not go from one extreme to the next? In the spiritual sense, this card is about, becoming spiritually adept at something, right? So we may be trying our hand at something, testing something out, experimenting with something, but it may be so we can become more adept at whatever that particular thing is. And remember, the world card coming before it was all about spiritual practices and being a spiritual practitioner. And with that in mind, then another possibility with temperance is about blending and combining things, right? So it could be a matter of, if you're a spiritual practitioner, this could be putting some energy and attention in combining two maybe different disciplines or two different modalities in a way that you can see how they would blend or harmonize each other, right? And again, if we're talking about maybe doing something holistically, maybe something with our physical well-being, I tend to look at temperance as, maybe some moderation being around food and beverages. Because I tend to think of somebody who works with food or someone who works with alcohol, like a mixologist, right? So there could be about, what do we need to temper or what do we need to moderate in terms of maybe food and diet, and for some people even maybe even alcohol, right? And I'm saying that because this card mirrors the King of Pumpkins, right? And so that, remember, the King of Pumpkins, one of its meanings could be getting some power or some control or a sense of mastery over our physical well-being, right? And one more thing that I will say, and I will wrap it up on this note, that Temperance is a card that can represent patience, right? One of its chief lessons, as a major arcana card for me, it can represent the art of patience, right? So there could just be a matter of, as things unfold this week, patience may need to be called on, right? So it's about how can you practice being patient, maybe with a particular experience, especially if maybe you're looking for something to come to an end or come to a sense of completion, the world, right? You may need to be patient as that process reaches its end, right? But this is about practicing the art of patience, right? This card would say patience is a virtue. So how can you demonstrate or practice more patience this week? And on that note, I'll go ahead and end this week's Oracle Outlook. I'm James Himm Mitchell, and as I close, I'd like to thank you for sharing space here with me for this week's video reading, and I look forward to sharing the same space with you again in our next video reading together. So until then, I'm hoping that you have a wonderful day, and I'm hoping that you have a tarot-tastic week one that's filled with a whole lot of treats and not so many tricks. Take care.